I wanted to go over my Amber Amethyst Snow White deck in a little bit more detail because while I found a lot of success with this, potentially going 10-0 but really went 9-1, I saw some comments stating that people found this hard to use and they just think it's not very good. And by no means is this going to be a top tier deck by any standard because Ruby Amethyst has kind of solidified itself as the tier 0 deck of the format. But I think this deck list is pretty good, and again, as I've shown in my gameplay, you can do a lot of work and develop some interesting lines in order to combat the meta. So I just wanted to break down the deck list and my reasons for the choices that I've made, because the first thing that stands out probably is the 43 inkable and 17 uninkable count, which is normally pretty high. I don't like to go over 15 or maybe even 16 if I'm really pushing it. But the reason I go for 17 here is because the Rafiki and the Pinocchios, which account for 6 of your uninkables, are relatively low, and same with the Peter Pan Shadow at a 3 copies at a 4 drop. These cards aren't necessarily bricky cards because you can use them so early. The bricky cards in this deck are definitely the Elsa and the Ursula and the Snow White, because if you draw them too early and multiple copies of them, then your hand is bricky and it's very hard to recover from that. Now, that being said, this deck does utilize a ton of draw. You have Surfer Stitches, you have Rapunzels, you have Maleficents, you have Friends on the other side, so much so that we didn't even need to play Merlin Rabbit. But when you look at how this deck curves out, I've opted to cut one of the Rapunzels and both of the Pocket Watches for 3 Olafs just to give you some additional 1-drop pressure on turn 1. But the 4 Queens is kind of what you want to see, or 1 copy of the 4 Queens, because Queen into Commanding Presence Queen is a very strong line for this deck, as you can protect Queen with Bodyguard most likely, and early on there's almost no removal that deals with it. And the Queen either will stop your opponent from questing, alleviating some of that pressure, because if you quest with Queen and you have another character on board, like a Bodyguard, the debuff and buff of the effect of the Queen just makes it so that you trade freely into anything your opponent has. So it's very, very strong to get out early. The Simba Bodyguard and the Snow White are also half decent to establish early. You've seen, if you watch my videos, how the small Snow White has come down and actually healed up characters like my rush characters to give them new life, make sure that they survive a challenge or my opponent can't challenge them, or just be pinged off by something. And that way I can utilize the rush characters for even getting a 3-for-1, because I drop it, I get a 1, like a trade into something, so the card instantly goes 1-for-1. Then they have to trade something back into the rusher, right, like the Mimfox or the Rafiki, for example. Then the card usually goes 2-for-1 if it takes out that character or card, or a card that's used on it as well. So the Snow White healing that stuff up early on in the game is a really nice way to gain additional advantage. The Pinocchios, I've already explained, is like your main source of removal in this deck, which sounds very odd, but again, if you've watched those videos, still in this game, the primary way of getting lore is with characters. You have obviously some alternative ways, like with Merlin Goat and Sleepy's Flute and whatnot, but when your opponent drops characters, you being able to exert them and just out them right away with the like rush characters like Mimfox, Rafiki, and Peter Pan Shadow is very, very strong. Your opponent, first of all, likely doesn't expect it, and secondly, just dealing with their characters on board can throw off their curve so much that it completely derails their whole game plan. So for example, if you watch my match against Ruby Amethyst, on turn 3 the opponent dropped a Maleficent, they had a Friends on the other side, they had a Mimfox in hand, right, because they revealed that later, and just Pinocchioing that Maleficent and then throwing something into it to take it off field means that the opponent couldn't establish the Mimfox because they had nothing to bounce back. They couldn't sing the Friends on the other side, so on turn 4 they had to hard cast it, and it just puts them behind so many turns on tempo while I'm still generating lore, building up a board, and just making it hard to deal with. So the Pinocchio is a critical part of this deck because it combos with the other rushers. Now, it also synergizes extremely well. Again, if you've watched my match against the Amber Emerald Mufasa deck, where they drop like Tinkerbells and Rays, like these evasive 2 questers, 3 questers, the Peter Pan Shadow just enables you to rush them down with the Mimfox or Rafiki, which at a 3 strength stat line is very, very relevant, because the Ray will die to a Rafiki or to a Mimfox. And so using Pinocchio to tap those down and take them out before they can even quest is insanely beneficial as well. So the Pinocchio is super critical. I've already explained the rusher, so I'm not going to go over the Rafiki and the Madame Mim and the Peter Pan Shadow, but these rush characters are very important to the deck. The Rafiki is actually very, very key because it's one of the cards that you can instantly get back with Snow White, and you don't have to worry about bouncing a card like you do with the Mimfox. in order to play it. So once there's one Rafiki in your discard, you're just able to quest with the Snow White Well-Wisher, get that Rafiki back, drop it, take out an opponent's threat right away without having to worry about the Mim bounce line. Of course, there have been instances, again, if you watch my gameplay video, where you actually want the Mim Fox instead of the Rafiki, because maybe you have a Pinocchio on board that you want to cycle back into your hand, which I've done. And so I quest with the Snow White, get back the Madam Mim Fox, drop it, bring back the Pinocchio, recast the Pinocchio, tap down an opponent's character, and then use that Mim Fox I just brought back with the Well-Wisher to take that threat out. So it's a complete cycle of cards that synergize extremely well. Again, if you haven't seen those matches, check the description for that. The Maleficent speaks for itself. It's a 3-of. It's a card that replaces itself on curve. It's decent as a 3-drop if you don't have the Rafiki that needs to take something out, so that's why we play that. And then 3 Rapunzel, which is actually pretty important here because, like I said, dealing with all of those rush characters, you're likely going to end up with like 1 or 2 damage on a character, and just being able to drop Rapunzel and draw cards is very critical. As well as in the mid to late game, you can see here that we play a Snow White with 5 toughness, Surfer Stitch with 8 toughness, Maximus with 5 toughness, even the Elsa and the Ursula, right, with their 6 and 8 toughness respectively, are all huge targets for Rapunzel to draw 3 off of. And again, if you've watched my gameplay, you've seen me use a Surfer Stitch to crash into a Maui, put 6 damage on my Surfer Stitch so that I can Rapunzel 3 and draw 3, and just like, you know, when Rapunzel goes off for that, there's almost no way you lose that game. So in and of itself, the Rapunzel being able to draw you out of bricky hands or something can be very important. And then, of course, it's Goat, right? Being able to cycle it back with the Snow White is very critical. So again, so many like well synergized cards with the Snow White, right? But you don't need to bounce the Goat if you can just use its overstated, 4/3 stat line for 4. You drop it, it gains you a lore, you crash it into something because at 4 strength, it takes out a lot, right? It gets over that 3 toughness that a lot of people are playing with their characters. And then it goes to your discard pile, you gain a lore when it leaves play as well. Then you just Snow White it back to your hand. Who needs to bounce it when you can just Well-Wisher it back to hand, right? And then again, Maximus is just an insane card overall to protect your Snow White, to protect your Queen, and even your rush characters that you can favorably trade when you want. And at a 4/5 stat line, and the fact that it gives support, there's been instances where you can drop a Peter Pan Shadow, quest with the Maximus or the Queen commanding presence, beef up that Peter Pan Shadow or the Rafiki, and they become 7/3s, 6/3s. Madam Mim Fox becomes an 8/3. Nothing is surviving that, right? You're just taking out anything. So there's been instances as well where I faced up against like the Cinderella Stout-Hearted, and you need a card with at least 7 strength to get over that. You drop a Pinocchio, you exert it, you quest with Maximus, you beef up a Rafiki. Rafiki's now 7/3. You take out the Stout-Hearted for free, right? And so there's a lot of synergy with this deck, with the Maximus as well, not only for the bodyguard effect, but for the support. I've already explained how the Queen synergizes really well, and of course Snow White is kind of what the deck is based around. Then for your endgame package, this is where you have some flexibility, because the Surfer Stitch is obviously very good to draw cards and just a good body on board at 4/8, that quest for 2. But I would say you can probably afford to cut the Ursula, and maybe just go with 3 Elsa. That'll cut your uninkable count down to 16. It does give you 3 Elsas, which are a little bit more bricky since it costs 8. But the Elsa is definitely more impactful because it's one of your main ways to stabilize in the end game by locking down your opponent's threat. So again, if you've watched that match against Ruby Amethyst, where it looked like my opponent kind of clawed back the advantage, clawed back tempo, was stabilized on their board, and they had threats to quest to start taking over the game, and all I had to do was drop an Elsa. And as soon as I dropped that Elsa, I tapped down 5 lore on their board in the Lady Tremaine and their opposing Ursula. And I was like, being a Ruby Amethyst player myself, I know they have to deal with this Elsa, either with a Maleficent Dragon, but I don't think they were on 9 ink yet. They were going to be on 8 ink. And if they don't have that, they have to be prepared, because I was going to quest up to 18 and I had a Goat and a Fox in my hand. And so if they didn't deal with my board, I would have just quested to 18, dropped the Goat, and then dropped the Fox to win the game. They didn't end up be preparing their own board, which again cost them their whole turn on 8 ink. They have 1 ink left. They can't really play anything. They pass it back to me. Now I establish Goat, and whatever I draw, I think I drew like a Maleficent, and now I have the advantage once again. So I was still ahead in the lore. I dealt with the opponent's board by forcing them to cast the Be Prepared, and all of that was forced out by the Elsa. So Elsa is definitely more critical than the Ursula, I would say. So I would say you have some flexibility there. Cutting an uninkable for an inkable And you don't really need the card draw off the Ursula. Yes, the lore drain is nice, but again, usually not needed because the Elsa just stops the quest anyways. So why drain the lore when you can just prevent the quest? Obviously, Elsa doesn't play around Goat or Spellbook or Sleepy's Flute. But again, if you're in a race with this deck, you have so many controlling options with the Amethyst package of the rush cards that you should be stabilizing early on and hopefully playing around playing faster than, not playing around, but playing faster than those non-questing sources of lore. And then, of course, Friends on the Other Side being at 3. I'll wrap up the video saying I don't think it's worth playing the Cinderella singer just to sing Friends. The Olaf at a 1-3 stat line is a little bit more resilient than Cinderella, and so that's why I've opted for that. But yeah, this video ended up being longer than I thought. We are already at 10 minutes. If you are interested in seeing more gameplay for the Snow White deck, please let me know in the comment section below. If you've made it this far, thank you again. A like would be appreciated. Quantum is out.